Hey, lighten up, jerk!
One, I want to, because we're getting close on our time here, but I wanted to kind of talk about some of our philosophies when it comes to studying theology, and there's a few scripture verses that I always go back to that are kind of like they're life verses for me,
Sure.
and have kind of forged me, going forward in studying scripture. And one is from, I believe it's Joshua, is like, just before they're ready to go into the promised land, it says, to always, keep the word of the Lord on your heart. So that means we constantly have to be reading it.
Yeah.
And then the other one comes from the New Testament, from Peter, where he is. It's kind of the whole passage of him, like us being subject to those that are around us because we are Christ's representatives.
Right.
And so, kind of finishing that point, he talks about it's like always be prepared to have an answer for why you have the hope that you do.
Yeah.
And that's why we study.
Yes.
And that's why we do what we do, because when we start living differently, it raises questions as to, it raises the curiosity of other people and provides opportunities to share what we believe in. And so that's the way I've always approached it, and why I may not always have everything right or have everything fleshed out.
Sure.
But I will always, at least have some sort of reason for why I believe in what I do.
Right.
And I'm always prepared to share it.
Correct.
And so that's what has really driven me to study as hard as I have. And that's what I always try to get other people that I'm teaching to do as well. To me, those are the most important points. What would you agree with that, or do you have anything to add to that?
To add your point, yeah. When he says make a defense, it's I believe the Greek for apologetics, and it's kind of For me personally, actually one of the reasons why I enjoy the college kids is it's kind of that age where you really have to start forming your beliefs, and I want to start them on a good track. And so for me, 2 Timothy kind of comes into my mind where it says, like, preach the word in season and out of season, for people are going to twist it. And it says all scripture is inspired by God, and it's profitable for training, reproof, training,
Right. Yeah. Okay. I forgot that one, but
all of it. And it's so critical, and it does mention before and after that there will be people that twist it, and so really my life verse I've been trying to inculcate to you guys is really 2 Timothy 2:2, which basically talks about Paul to Timothy, like, these things that you've heard from me, train these to faithful men who will teach others also. And you see this baton passing, and I really see this four generational passing the truths of Paul to Timothy, and Timothy to faithful men to teach others also. And so
Right.
And what that assumes is that you've learned something. You can't teach something that you don't know, and so there's an expectation that you have to be learned in something, and it has to be to faithful people and available people, and that's pretty much aligning to what you say.
Yeah, because and the verses I shared were with Joshua 1:8 and 1 Timothy 3:15, I believe, is the other one that I shared.
Right.
Just for for those of you that are interested. So I guess we kind of come at it in a similar manner in that way. Something I was discussing the other day, and kind of theology is fun that way. You always learn something new.
Sure.
And I find I'm one of those people where I do, and I think you would agree with this, that we do take the Bible as literally we believe that it's real. It's a while yes, it was God used men to write it. Sure. It was Him that was the author of these books.
Right.
That we find it divinely inspired, and while there's various genres that are used and different varieties of writing and varieties of language that were used, it is a book that, like as you said, it's profitable. It's all profitable. It's all everything is good for teaching and correcting, all that stuff. And something I was sharing with my friend Dan, who was on the podcast last time, is that for Christianity, and this is me personally, I believe this, that once you start the sole core of our faith and that rests is we have to believe in the gospel message that it was necessary for there to be this sacrifice of Jesus Christ for him to have died
Right.
and to have risen again. That's if you believe that, you're a Christian. There's nothing else you need. Everything else that we study theologically is all gravy at that point. It doesn't really affect your salvation.
Sure.
But I will say this, that once you if some people one really big point of contention especially comes with Genesis, and there's obviously various attacks that happen on that book.
Sure.
And I find it's because once you start thinking that true events that we start making up as like legend or myth, and it's like, well, it didn't quite really happen the way that it said. It's like, well, okay, once you start changing that,
Sure.
it's like, well, that if that becomes like legend or isn't quite true,
Right.
well, then why should we believe that this other stuff that we're reading that we do believe is true? Like what about that is what makes that true? Why isn't that a myth?
Right.
And I find it troublesome that where you start to do that.
Exactly.
And so I don't know, I'd like you to share your thoughts on that.
I mean, I totally agree in the sense that the gospel is the most central message in the scriptures,
Right.
and you can't get that wrong, and that's how you create cults. That being said, I do recognize that there are Christians who, have different takes on interpretation of scripture. There are, you have dispensational and covenantal. And that's another topic for another
Oh
day.
yeah, definitely.
But people have different interpretations, and but I think what you hit on was Genesis specifically, and I think it's a critical book because it so happens to be the first book, and I think if you are to take it, and I think this is what's happening is, there's people, there are multiple views on creation, but you have people that say, oh, let's take this figuratively, and then we have people like us who just say, it's literal, but I think the danger of holding kind of the more figurative approach and saying, oh, either that's poetry or that's figurative, is that at what point do you say, like, okay, part is actually legit and this part's actually, oh, they didn't have any way of representing, their current time, so that's their interpretation of it.
Right.
I mean, I don't take Genesis 1 and 2 different than Genesis 3 to the end of the book. It's what's written, and yes, there are, figurative mentionings, but they're very clear. But I mean, we can.
I think that. Well,
Uh-huh.
I think there's the Bible doesn't. It's not. There's pretty clear distinctions when it's. I've always been told something. It's like take it literally until it like says otherwise.
Right.
And there's clearly parts that are you look at Psalms. It's a poetic book. It's people
sure.
wrestling with their faith, through good and bad times. And I think another one that kind of comes to mind is Job, which is I think a good mixture of it's written poetically, but
Sure.
I would be one of the few that probably thinks that I believe it's a historical narrative.
For sure.
It was something that really happened. It just so happens to be written in poetry.
Right. Even when in the Gospels, when it says that the Spirit came like a dove, it wasn't actually a dove, but came to that form. But yeah,
And it's and some of the things that are happening is like we don't really have like words for it, so we have to use kind of hypothetical language
Right.
to represent those things that are happening. So yeah, and it's like it's once you really, if you have basic reading comprehension and you realize that okay, it is an older book, so the way things were written down or how things were done, you can't use today's how we would do books and literature today.
Right.
We can't take that and put that into there. We have to look at what was going on then and interpret from there.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, if I may add, but I think we don't give the ancients, the authors of the Bible or whatever, enough credit because they to even have written it, they have to have been learned people,
Yeah.
and so like I think it's you take it literally to the point. I think I'm in agreement where you take it literally to the point where that's not, you don't have to take it literally,
Yeah.
like in like the books of poetry or like like I mean you don't take literally the Song of Solomon where it like compares like a woman's breast to like pomegranates or whatever. It's just like that's
Sure.
so they're
It's a great book.
it's a very beautiful poem.
Sure.
It really is. And so I think we have to I don't know who said it, but they called like when we take our current context and apply it to the past or something,
Mhm.
or like look down on the past, and
Mhm.
we like it's called like chronological snobbery.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, like they were like living in caves or whatever. It's like, well, no, they had they had a
Sure.
sophisticated writing system, and and an alphabet and stuff, and they were putting their words to ink to paper. So we have
Right.
to. So they're not idiots,
Mhm.
So they had this, and they had the system. So we can't we can't. We had that chronological snobbery, and it's like, oh well, they were idiots. They didn't know what they were doing.
Mm.
It's like, and we can't, we can't allow ourselves to think that way.
Right.